I am Robert Morgan. This is my first broadcast on the digital radio station. I hope I'm not a burden on you and my colleagues at the digital station. Ready? Let's begin. Nobody in town knew exactly where the meat came from. That was the first thing that bothered Mason. The Little Burger restaurant had been sitting between an abandoned gas station and a closed-down motel for almost 30 years, yet somehow it never seemed to run out of customers. The burgers were cheap, too cheap, and they were unbelievably good. People drove from neighboring towns just to eat there. Some customers came 3 or 4 nights a week. Others arrived alone, ordered the same thing, sat in the darkest corner, and left without saying a word. Mason had started working the night shift because he needed money, and his boss, a quiet man named Walter, seemed almost offended whenever he asked where the meat came from. Family supplier, Walter always said. That was it. No company name, no delivery truck, no invoices, nothing. The strange part was that Mason had never seen a supplier arrive. The restaurant received deliveries only after midnight, long after the last customers had left, and Walter always insisted on unloading everything himself. He never allowed Mason to help. One night, Mason arrived early and noticed Walter carrying something through the back door. It was wrapped in thick black plastic. Mason thought it was a side of beef until he saw a hand slip out from underneath the plastic. He froze. The hand was pale, too pale. Its fingers hung loosely against the black plastic as Walter struggled to keep the package from dragging across the floor. Mason's first thought was that it had to be fake. A mannequin hand. Anything except what his eyes were telling him. Walter looked at him. Neither man spoke. Then Walter slowly covered the hand again. You didn't see anything. Mason should have called the police. Instead, he stayed. Because Walter offered him double pay. And because curiosity is sometimes stronger than fear. He kept telling himself there had to be an explanation. But when Mason returned to work the next evening, he noticed something underneath the kitchen sink. A small metal tag. There was a name engraved on it. A woman's name. Mason recognized it immediately. It belonged to a woman whose disappearance had been on the local news only 2 weeks earlier. He put the tag back exactly where he found it. Over the next few nights, Mason began noticing things. Certain customers never came back. People who had complained about the restaurant disappeared. A homeless man who used to sleep behind the building vanished. Then Mason found the refrigerator, behind a false wall. He had been looking for a replacement box of frozen fries when he noticed that one section of the wall sounded hollow. He pushed against it. Nothing happened. He pushed harder. The panel moved. Behind it was a narrow doorway. Cold air touched his face. The smell coming from inside wasn't exactly rotten. That was what scared him. It smelled fresh, almost clean. Inside were dozens of sealed packages. Each one had a name written on it. Not numbers, names, dates. Some names had been crossed out. Others had small check marks beside them. He recognized several. One belonged to a missing woman whose face had been on television for weeks. Another belonged to a man Mason had personally seen eating at the restaurant 3 nights earlier. His stomach turned. He opened another package. Inside was a small plastic bag containing a wedding ring. The name written on the package belonged to the woman who had reported her husband missing. Mason backed away. He suddenly became aware of every sound around him. The humming freezer, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead, the faint metallic ticking coming from somewhere inside the kitchen. Then he heard the kitchen door open. Walter was standing behind him. You finally found it. Mason couldn't move. Walter sighed. I was hoping you'd never have to. Mason looked toward the hidden room, then back at Walter. What is this place? Walter didn't answer immediately. He walked past Mason and gently closed the freezer door. You think you're looking at a storage room. Mason swallowed. Walter looked toward the wall. You think those names are evidence. He turned back to him. They aren't. Then what are they? Walter pointed toward the freezer. You think that's where the secret is? Mason stared at him. Walter smiled. No, son. The secret is why people keep coming back. And for the first time, Mason realized something that terrified him more than the packages. Nobody had ever forced those people to enter the restaurant. They had walked in willingly. Mason ran. He didn't stop until he reached the police station. He told them everything. The freezer, the names, the missing people, the restaurant. The police searched the place that same night. They found nothing. No freezer, no hidden room, no human remains. Nothing. Walter was gone. The restaurant was empty. Even the kitchen equipment had disappeared. The officers eventually assumed Mason had suffered some kind of breakdown. But Mason knew what he'd seen. He knew what had been inside that freezer. He knew the names hadn't been written there by accident. And worst of all, he could still smell the cold metal whenever he closed his eyes. Then something strange happened. 3 days later, the restaurant reopened. Same sign, same tables, same menu, same prices, and the same customers. Mason stood across the street watching them enter. Some of them were people he recognized. Others were strangers. Then he saw someone who made his blood run cold. His mother. She had been dead for 11 years. Mason followed her inside. She sat at the counter. Walter appeared behind her. Mason watched his mother smile. Same order. She nodded. The special. Mason stepped forward. Mom. She turned. Her face looked exactly as he remembered it. But her eyes were wrong. Not dead. Not empty. Just familiar. She looked at Walter. How long are we going to keep pretending? Walter placed a burger in front of her. Then he looked directly at Mason. We've been waiting for you. Mason couldn't understand. Waiting for him. Walter pushed a second burger across the counter. This is yours. Mason stared at it. Then he noticed the receipt. There was a name printed beneath the order. His name. And beneath it was a date. Tomorrow. Mason whispered, "What is this?" His mother answered, "The truth." She told him the restaurant had never been a normal restaurant. It was a place where people came to consume something they couldn't admit they wanted. The meat wasn't the real secret. The restaurant didn't simply turn people into food. It erased them. Their photographs disappeared. Their records disappeared. Their families slowly forgot them. Even memories began disappearing. Mason looked around. Every customer was eating silently. Then he recognized them. Every missing person. Every person reported dead. Every person the town had forgotten. They weren't customers. They were victims. But they weren't eating the meat. They were eating memories. And Walter wasn't the owner. He was the keeper. Mason's mother leaned closer. You were never hired here, Mason. You were brought here. Why? She smiled sadly. Because you're the last person who remembers everyone. Walter placed another burger on the counter. This one contains your father. Mason stepped backward. He could barely breathe. Why would you show me this? Walter's expression changed. For the first time, the smile disappeared. Because you already tasted him. Mason stared at the burger. A strange memory suddenly surfaced. His father sitting beside him when he was a child. A paper wrapper. The smell of grilled meat. His father's voice telling him to finish every bite. Mason shook his head. No. His mother lowered her eyes. You don't remember because the restaurant took that memory too. And tomorrow? Walter looked at him. Tomorrow, the restaurant serves you. Mason spent the entire night trying to escape. Every door led back to the restaurant. Every window showed the same street. Every phone call connected to the kitchen. Even the police station had become part of the restaurant. By sunrise, Mason understood something terrifying. He wasn't trapped inside the building. He was trapped inside the memory of the building. The restaurant existed only because people remembered it. And every person who ate there slowly became part of it. Walter finally told him the truth. The restaurant had existed for generations, not as a business, as a ritual. Every generation needed one person who remembered the forgotten. Someone who could carry the memories of everyone the world had erased. Mason's mother had been that person. then his father, now him. Why me? Walter looked almost embarrassed. Because you were born here. Mason stared at him. No. Walter nodded. You were. Mason suddenly remembered something from childhood. A kitchen, a red sign, his father holding his hand, and a woman screaming somewhere behind a locked door. He had spent his entire life believing those memories were nightmares. They weren't. He had been raised inside the restaurant. His parents had escaped. They had tried to give him a normal life. But the restaurant had followed them. It had been waiting for him to remember. Then Mason noticed something on the counter. A photograph. It showed him standing behind the restaurant as a child. Walter was beside him, and his mother was holding a tray. On the tray were 3 burgers. Mason whispered, "Who ate the first one?" Walter didn't answer. His mother did. "You did." Mason stared at her. "No." She nodded. "You were 6. And you were hungry." Mason's entire body went cold. He suddenly remembered. The first burger hadn't contained a stranger. It had contained his father. His mother hadn't escaped with him. She had brought him back. Every year. Every birthday. Every time Mason thought he was eating a normal burger, he was actually consuming another piece of his family's memories. That's why he couldn't remember his father. That's why photographs of his childhood seemed wrong. That's why his mother had died 11 years ago, but still appeared inside the restaurant. She wasn't his mother anymore. She was the memory he had eaten. Walter pushed the final burger toward him. There was no name on it. Only one word. Mason. He looked at Walter. "What happens if I don't eat it?" Walter smiled. Then the restaurant disappears. Mason stared at the burger. And everyone inside. They disappear with it. For the first time, Mason understood the real horror. The restaurant wasn't forcing him to become a murderer. It was forcing him to choose who deserved to exist. He picked up the burger. Everyone watched. His mother began crying. Walter lowered his head. Mason took one bite and suddenly remembered every person who had ever disappeared. Every face, every name, every scream, every meal, every person he had unknowingly consumed. Then he looked at Walter and smiled, because he finally remembered one thing nobody else did. Walter had been the first person Mason ever killed. 30 years ago, Mason had been 6 years old, and Walter had been his father. The man standing behind the counter wasn't Walter at all. It was the restaurant, wearing his father's face. Mason dropped the burger. The lights went out, and somewhere in the darkness, thousands of voices whispered the same sentence. "Thank you for remembering us." The next morning, the restaurant was gone. So was Mason. But 6 months later, a new burger restaurant opened 3 towns away. Same cheap prices, same strange taste. And on the menu, beneath the ordinary burgers, there was one new item. The special, free for first-time customers. Nobody knew who owned the place, except the employees. They called him Mason.